Hello everyone, it's Chocolate here. Things have been a little bit busy for me this last month, so that's why I haven't made a video lately. However, the update to my gear recommendations is coming out soon. I've been working on revamping that, so just everything more visually appealing and more clear, and also to include a mobile version in the published spreadsheet that's just easier to view on mobile, because at the moment it's just really hard to see when using it on your phone. So hopefully I can get that out in the next few days, and also some UE stuff, talking a little bit about the current and upcoming UE, which ones are worth unlocking and saving for, since I assume a lot of people are going to want to go ham on the Sanctum 2 refreshes, just full refresh to get all those precious shards, and you unlock some of the luxury UE finally. So with that out of the way, I don't want to leave everyone hanging with nothing at all. So since I wasn't able to make any proper videos during CB about timelines, I've decided to just do my favorite timeline from last CB and do an in-depth video about how it works and why it works and what goes into it. Nobody's going to be able to use it now because CB is already over, but hopefully it's going to be interesting to those of you who are interested in how timelines work, and perhaps creating your own, or help a little bit with transcribing already existing timelines, because to me that's one of the most important skills for timeliners right now, where most of the really good timelines are already created, and it's more about being able to transcribe them properly and relay to players how it works and what the tells are, so that you don't have to kind of be vague in timings that should be precise. So that's the goal for today. Hopefully this is going to be useful to a couple people, and let's go. So starting off here, let's stop right again. Units here. This is a very unconventional team for us, because it's 3 supports and 1 DPS and 1 shredder. So this is not something we usually see, but in this case it works out perfectly, because Mushushu is a damage type boss. So normally C1 and C2, or just the first 2 bosses, are relatively simple in that they just do damage and not much else. But the 3rd, 4th and 5th bosses usually have some kind of mechanic that is important to play around. Like some will stun or charm and stuff like that, or others have the targeting like the horse and all of that stuff. But this one is rather rare for one of those bosses, in that it's just pure damage. It does a lot of damage, tons of damage, and you somehow have to deal with it. But this comp doesn't just deal with it, it takes full advantage of the damage boosting TP and just turbocharges Eriko to get the most out of her as possible. We're going to see Eriko use multiple UBs during some buff periods, where it's just one UB after the other, and getting more than 2 million damage in some cases when running this timeline. So for ranks, as Kokoro can, I think she worked even at rank 12, but obviously I'm using my rank 10 here. Yukari as well, she can work at rank 11 or 12, but mine's just rank 12 because that's what she's going to be used at least until 6-star. Vishizu, 12-4 used in this case, but I think even 11-6 worked. For Eriko, obviously, we just maxed her to 12-5 because that's where she has the most damage, and the one timeline where 12-4 would have been useful in some cases with a imperfect Uruka. We didn't use that, so 12-4 was also not needed. So, but for Makoto, this one hard requires 12-5. It just straight up, it does not work with anything but 12-5. 11-6 just dies at the first UB. So this is one of those cases where either you have your own 12.5 or you borrow her. And it's also something to note here. This is kind of the advent of the high rank Makoto. So until this point, I think every clan has kept like 1 or 2 rank 9 Makoto, but in my opinion, that's not really necessary anymore, because rank 11 is already a really big damage boost over rank 9, just in terms of her personal damage. And the times where rank 9 actually gets better shred timings than rank 11 are very few and far in between. And at the same time, we now have access to rank 12, or for next CB, rank 13, which is an even bigger damage boost with all the P-crit she gets. So for Makoto, it's just a matter of, at this point, most often it's going to be highest rank is just biggest damage, because her timings are usually reachable, and even when she can get marginally better timings at a lower rank, it's rather unlikely that she gets better damage out of it, because even if other units get better damage from the better shred, for Makoto herself, it's always a damage loss and really rarely worth it anymore. So my prediction for Makoto, even though this is supposed to be about a timeline, from now on, I think we're going to see much more max rank Makoto than anything else. First off, so for this Makoto UB here, as you may have noticed, this was rather slow, and also if you try to time this off Makoto hitting, it's a really weird timing. It's kind of, her sword is on the ground and bouncing around a little bit. If I go back a little bit here, let me just, right here. So it's just a sword bounces on the ground a little bit. You can't really time it off that. So the genius idea some came up with here is Vishizu opening her eyes. If we look here, her eyes are open now, and now we UB. This was already a little bit late, but it's still quite enough on time for the Makoto UB. So what this does is we want to extend the shred from this UB until a little bit later. So we kind of need to delay the time from when the attack Makoto does hits until we actually use her UB. At the same time, we do have to speed up Makoto's cycle a little bit, so that her shred with Howl and her UB comes out on time for Eriko skills, because Eriko's cycle is slightly faster than Makoto's. So if we can't really delay Makoto's cycle a lot until Eriko just starts hitting poison mists and auto attacks that are fully buffed outside of shred, and we lose tons of damage that way. So this is why we use this strange timing, and pay attention to Vishizu's eyes, because she's gonna lower her hands here and open her eyes, and that's the timing where Makoto can UB. And this is one of those times where it's really important to have a cue like that, because otherwise it's really hard to time. And in this case, it's very nice actually, because once you figure that out with Vishizu lowering her hands and opening her eyes, it's easy to get into a proper rhythm and always get this consistently here. Next up, in Vishizu being nice for timings, her timings are just auto for the first 2. And now for Yukari. So another case of we have to slightly delay her, but not too much. So we want to delay her UB or her cycle overall a little bit, because what's going to happen is her target selection for Moonlight and for her heal have to come out after certain times. So obviously for Moonlight, we want it to happen after Eriko UB, so that she has 0 TP or low TP and gets targeted by Moonlight. At the same time, we also want to delay her heal a little bit, because one of her next heals is going to be at a time where Eriko and Makoto, either one of those two, can have lower HP than the other. And we don't want Yukari's heal to land on Eriko, because it has an MDEF buff on it. For Makoto, it doesn't really matter. She's going to get her timings regardless. But for Eriko, it would mean losing the timing on one of her UBs after that. So we really don't want that heal on Eriko. But what we can do to avoid that is use S-Kokoro UB in advance if we notice Eriko has lower HP than Makoto. However, if Yukari's heal targeting happens too early, we don't have the chance to use that S-Kokoro heal. So we need to have Yukari just slightly delayed to have that all come out late enough, but at the same time, her cycle can't be delayed too much, because otherwise at the very end of where the last boss UB happens, her Moonlight has to start before that, otherwise she boosts the wrong person. So we have to delay it, but we can't delay it too much, so it's going to be slightly late. And if we go back here, look at S-Kokoro, because she's again, or this is the first time in this case, where S-Kokoro is going to be our cue and indicator for when to UB, because she's swung her spear around a couple times doing her buff, and that's our indicator for Yukari UB. Just very nice to get the correct timing. So now for the next Makoto UB here, Eriko has been at full TP for a while now. Now she's also applied her buff. We just need everything in shred, and also we want to set her up so that she's gonna have the lowest TP, so that she will receive the Moonlight from Yukari here in a second. So what we want to do is, Makoto UB is gonna happen soon. We will do that as soon as possible, just to keep her cycle as fast as possible, right here. And now Makoto is gonna have 0 TP. Eriko, after her UB, is also gonna have 0 TP. However, what's gonna happen here is, if you look at the boss here, it's starting an attack. This is the stomp that hits the first two. However, we are going to intentionally waste some TP on Eriko here, because we won't UB until after this attack hits. We don't take the extra TP from the damage, but what this does is Makoto is gonna have some TP on her, but Eriko is gonna be on 0 TP after her UB here. So she takes the damage, we UB, and now Eriko is at 0 TP. Makoto has some TP from the boss, but yeah, Eriko is at lowest TP. If we didn't wait for the damage to come out here, Eriko would be at higher TP and the whole thing would fall apart. We'd just get some extra Makoto UB, but it doesn't really do much here because we don't need the extra shred at the moment. And yeah, so here Moonlight targeting starts, Eriko starts an attack, the boss uses UB, and I want you to pay attention here because Eriko is going to finish her attack after the boss UB finishes, and we can immediately UB after. So she's already almost at half HP here. She's gonna get a Moonlight from Yukari, her attack hits, and we can Eriko UB. So 2 seconds, 2 Eriko UBs, and with some crit luck you can get more than 500k damage in those 2 seconds. That's some DPS, huh? So next up, pretty easy actually. Boss hits Makoto and we just want to speed up her cycle a little, so we just spam cancel her auto attack here, keep up the shred, and this is where we get to the point I've talked about earlier, where Yukari is gonna heal at 0.47 and we want to make sure it lands on Makoto. In this case, Eriko was a nice girl and properly crit her UBs, so her HP is very clearly higher, but if her HP was lower, we would want to UB S-Kokoro right here after the naval support applies. So this is where we would UB S-Kokoro slightly earlier than this, obviously, because the buff applies just before the light hits. But yeah, this is the opportunity to save Eriko from being healed by Yukari. And as you can see, Yukari hasn't actually started her healing yet, so it's still possible to heal one unit without double healing from having Yukari heal the same unit again, because her targeting happened before we healed. So she heals Makoto here, and now on the second naval support here, we can UB and heal Eriko. There were some memes made here because there was the suggestion of using a ruler, and I can assure you it did happen, where we paused the game and used image editing software to compare the HP bars of Makoto and Eriko to see who had more HP and who didn't. So yeah, just a nice little part there. That was kind of funny to talk about, but at the same time quite made some pilots quite sweaty when they had to decide there whether to heal Eriko or not. Because if you get the S-Kokoro heal on Makoto and Yukari heals Eriko, it's just hurts a bit, because I think that's around 150k damage loss right there. So, but in this case, it all went well. S-Kokoro healed Eriko after the Yukari already got the heal on Makoto. So now we get to the next Eriko UB. So for this one, Eriko is going to use her buff here, and the issue is if we used it as soon as possible, which is a few frames before this, we would speed up Eriko's cycle too much. She would hit a poison mist right outside of Shred, because it's going to hit, well, just a little bit before Makoto does her howl and gets her UB off. So what we do here is we slightly delay the Eriko UB, slightly slow down her cycle, so that that poison mist hits when Makoto already has applied full Shred. And for that we again use S-Kokoro. That's also why it's important to have S-Kokoro in a consistent cycle, because if we don't have her in that consistent cycle, we can't really time stuff off of her. So it's really critical to have her UB right as the buff applies, so that her next auto attack comes out at the same time every time. Because what we're going to do, and I'm going to play this out real quick soon, is we are going to time the Eriko UB according to when S-Kokoro hits the boss. So let's take a look here. Right there. So S-Kokoro hits the boss, we Eriko UB, and that sets up Eriko just so that her cycle is just slow enough to have her poison mist hit after Makoto can already apply her Shred. What it also does is it allows a good indicator for Makoto. I'm gonna let it play out a little bit more, because Vishizu gets another auto UB here. And now take a look at the Makoto UB coming out here, because this is supposed to be immediately after her howl Shred applies, but it's very difficult to see. So take a look. Really hard. She's kind of obscured, and we are supposed to kind of perfectly time Makoto UB just before the poison mist hits, but without cancelling her howl at the same time. So this is just doomed from the start, in my opinion, if we were to try to time it normally after the 3 flashes on Makoto howl. So what we do instead is we look at Eriko, and I'm going to go very, very slowly here. So Makoto starts her howl, Eriko starts her poison mist, boss hits, everything is just completely obscured, hard to tell what the fuck is going on, screen is shaking, but as you can see, Eriko's axe is raised almost to 12 o'clock soon. And since we have set up a consistent cycle here, we can know, okay, once Eriko's axe is at 12 o'clock, that's when Makoto's Shred is applied. And we also know there's a consistent timing we can hit after we use Makoto UB, where Eriko's attack has hit, so that we can Eriko UB immediately after her own attack hits. So that's what we're going to do now. Makoto UB, and I want you to pay attention at Eriko's HP here, because we can't really see anything. So we are not timing this UB according to anything on screen, we're just purely timing it according to rhythm. and you're going to see Eriko's HP is going to go up and the UB is going to come out immediately as that happens. So right here, HP goes up, UB triggers. So that's the indicator for Eriko's UB came out immediately after the attack hit, because her HP goes up from the damage she dealt with Poison Mist. So that's how we got this cycle perfectly out, to have Makoto apply Shred, Eriko hit her Poison Mist, and immediately UB after. So next up, what's going to come, this is the home stretch now, but it's still important to have some more cycle manipulation, because what's going to happen here again is kind of like the very first Makoto UB, where we had to slightly delay it, but also not delay it too much, because what's going to happen here, we're going to want to have this Makoto UB shred last until 007, where Eriko gets another UB, and at the same time we can't delay Makoto's cycle too much, because one, we need her to get a howl out before Eriko hits another Poison Mist. At the same time, we don't want to delay Eriko's cycle too much. We can delay her cycle so that her attack hits after Makoto's howl, even if we are slow. However, we don't want Eriko to be too slow for another reason I'm going to get into when we get there. And Makoto, we don't want to be too slow, because if we're too slow now, at a later UB, which we are going to spam out, it's going to trigger from boss damage. If we're too slow now, Makoto is going to start her Heart Slash, and it's going to get cancelled. So it would be nice in some cases where we want Heart Slash to be insta-cancelled, but not in this case, because that Heart Slash is going to get cancelled with no replacement. So we don't get an extra order at the end from cancelling it. It's just going to fizzle out into nothing, and I think for Heart Slash being cancelled while fully buffed from S-Kokoro and Vichy, so that's about 45k damage loss. So we really don't want that to happen. So this next Makoto UB has to be just slow enough and just fast enough. But luckily, I'm going to go back here. This one doesn't have to be precise. It's just once the sword lands on the ground, in this case, yeah, that's when you can UB. Luckily, this isn't really hard to, or this is really hard to fuck up, unless you kind of forget that this has to be slightly delayed. It's really easy to get. So just do that. And now another case of Eriko, we need to kind of delay her cycle a little bit so that her next attack comes out after Makoto applies her shred. And as you may be able to see, S-Kokoro has already attacked. It's not really good if you want to time it according to when she hits the boss, but we don't really need that. We can still time it off S-Kokoro here, and in this case we just use her drawing her spear back after her auto attack. So this is the position S-Kokoro should be in when we Eriko UB, and it keeps having our cycle properly aligned. So right here, Eriko UB got another round of nice crits. And for this one, it's one more case where you can already see the TP going to Eriko here. So we are going to do a double UB again, because the boss is going to stomp here. Eriko hits. And this is again double UB within one buff cycle. And I'm going to go back and we can look at that again, because here Makoto uses her howl, and this is why we delayed the Eriko UB cycle, because we need a little bit more. This is when the shred from Heroic Hole applies, right here, I think. So Eriko's Poison Mist hits just after that, right here. Going back again and forward, it's hit, and now her UB can come out. So that's how all that works together, just to create this moment where Poison Mist is in full shred and her UB can come out also in full shred. There's an additional extension to this where you can have, if I go back here, this S Kokoro UB coming out, and it's just basically impossible. I tried it a couple times, but I never got this, because if you look at S Kokoro's spear here, it's still quite a ways away from being from applying the buff. So, but if you get every single timing perfect, you are able to actually get this whole thing, Makoto applying her shred, Eriko hitting her poison mist just after S Kokoro applies her buff here. But in this case, I didn't get it. I didn't go for it even. I just was happy with all these other complicated timings. And this time for Vishizu, she would use Curing Sign here. And normally you would want that because it's a heal and it also has some TP attached to it. But in this case, it doesn't matter. Makoto is going to get it, and she gets her timing regardless. So we just spam it out, speed up Vishizu's cycle a little bit, and get the field applied for this Makoto attack. And now this is where I was talking about before, where we needed to be just fast enough on the Makoto auto to have her not trigger hard slash here. So we spam this out, have it trigger from boss damage during her idle time. And next up, this is the final Yukari UB. She's gonna heal here, and we're gonna UB her, and UB as Kokoro, heal everyone to full. And this is because we want to really speed up Yukari's cycle here, because her next Moonlight has to come out before the boss UB. I talked about it at the very beginning. This is really important. We need to have her next Moonlight come out before the boss UB, and I'm going to show why. So here we have Vishizu apply her shred just before Makoto hits, and now the boss is going to do its stomp again. Eriko already used her buff here, so we can just spam it, have it trigger instantly, and this is the reason why we had to delay Makoto's UB at 26 slightly, so that this UB is still in full shred. So now Eriko is at almost 0 HP. If you see Vishizu there, she's going to use her Curing Sign, add some extra TP, and now Yukari uses her Moonlight, she targets Eriko, and the boss is going to UB here. So a lot of stuff happens at the same time, all of that culminating in Eriko getting full TP right away. So now for the very last part here, as Kokoro buff applies, and now we're going to have Makoto Howl, UB, oh hang on, apologies, gonna go back slightly. So Makoto Howl, UB. Now I'm gonna go frame by frame here, because Eriko's Poison Mist is gonna hit just immediately after this. Right here. And Eriko UB. And that's where the fight ends. However, if you noticed, perhaps, I made a slight oopsie there, and it got covered by a crit, so the old saying of just crit more to make up for your mistakes. If you spot it here, I cancelled the Howl. I didn't get full shred here, because the Makoto UB is supposed to do 49k damage. It's in absolute full shred. It's maximum buff from everyone. But because I cancelled the Howl, the Makoto UB is only 25k, or in this case a 51k critical. So it ended up being the exact same damage, but sadly this wasn't perfect execution. But I still had to keep it, because It's just goes to show you can try your best, but sometimes you still make mistakes. But in this case, yeah, there was just too little time, because you'd have to be almost frame perfectly here to get it all done well, because Eriko's Poison Mist hit just slightly after Makoto's Howl and UB. So that's the whole timeline. What a work of art, and what a long video. This has been half an hour now, so enough time to fail this timeline 10 times over. If you look at Eriko, she did tons of damage, more than 2 million here. Makoto wasn't a slouch either, but hell, this was a lot. I hope I've been able to convey why I really like this video, and also how complicated and intricate some of the timelines can be. Why it's important to have precise timings and be consistent in them, and also why it's important to have good tells. So if you're a timeliner, or if you're someone who is going to transcribe timelines from Bilibili, for example, for next CB, just take this as a lesson to always make sure when you write your timelines, give good tells to your players. Make sure that they understand what's happening and when they need to use stuff, because it's sometimes really hard to figure out what goes wrong on a timeline when you don't actually know why you do certain stuff, and also don't have precise timings to use. In this case, the timeline was really quite easy to well, not quite easy. It was still hard to execute, as you can see where I messed up at the end, but at least it was doable to consistently execute in the end with the timings and cues given, because the cues were good and they were usable. But it's quite a journey to get there, because you did have to figure out how does all of this work together, and why do we do certain stuff, so timings work out perfectly. And yeah, it's one of those things where this is why, even while having access to the same timelines, some are able to execute them better, more consistently. It's because on timelines like these, you really notice the difference between just having it transcribed with random timings given, and just really people putting in deep thought and really trying to make sure it's properly conveyed what players need to do to execute it properly, and also to troubleshoot when things go wrong, so that they can figure out, hey, I'm not getting this Eriko UB with full shred, what's going wrong? Or my Poison Mist isn't hitting shred, where did I go wrong? So something to take away from this video maybe. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed this, even if you're not a complete nerd about this casual princess collector as I am. But still, I hope you've enjoyed this and it was a little bit interesting to you. Again, gear recommendations coming out soon. Have a good night. Goodbye.